Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. Indianapolis 500 saw a driver make a historic statement again this year. Coca-Cola 600, last two first to win. Kyle Larson double, doesn't end well. Plus Formula One, MotoG recap, and Week 8 of the Grid ranking. Welcome to Grid Life Wrap Up. I'm Joe Samriega, and with me we have Jonathan Fields from TheRacingExperts.com, Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight, and Tanner Smith, editor from the Pitbox Press. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. You too can invest in the Grid Network through Patreon, link in the video description, and YouTube Super Chat, buy me a coffee. We'd love to see everyone's comments right here on the air. And of course, visit us, Grid Network TV, across social media, as well as gridnetworktv.com, where we encourage everyone check out our website. Two big articles posted this morning. In fact, we have the Coca-Cola 600 recap from Matthew Bro, who was on the air with us yesterday, as well as Kobe Lambeth's article about the Indianapolis 500, Alex Palou taking a win, plus some of the latest articles from across the world of motorsports, and some of our feature segments and videos right here on the Grid Network. So I encourage everyone, be sure to visit our website, follow us across social media. Kobe, let's get started with the big race of the weekend, the Indianapolis 500. And we're seeing more history, but still, only two people have won a race this year.
Yeah, it's becoming kind of predictable, isn't it? And the 109th Indianapolis 500 saw plenty of cautions at the start. And I saw someone say, I thought Darlington was the track too tough to tame, and it seemed like yesterday the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was the track too tough to tame for all the IndyCar drivers. We also saw plenty of mistakes on pit road, including two scary incidents with Alexander Rossi's car catching on fire and Robert Schwartzman running into his crew members. A perfect race put on by anyone would mean victory. The closest person to being perfect was no other than Alex Palou, who led the final 14 laps to win his first Indy 500. It was also his first oval race victory and fifth win in the first 6 races, an unprecedented level of dominance we haven't seen in a very, very long time in the IndyCar Series. And to show you how dominant Alex Palou has been, his worst finish this season, the first 6 races, only second place in Long Beach. Like this guy, he just can't have an off day. And it seems like all his competitors in the Indy 500 in the championship, we'll get into this a little bit later, they had off days, but Alex Palou remains nearly perfect. Jonathan, I'll go to you with this one. Does Alex Palou's Indy 500 win put him in the same conversation as the likes of Scott Dixon, Will Power, Sam Hornish Jr., and Jill DeFerris Grace, with one Indy 500 win but multiple championships?
I think so. You look at the reign that Alex Palou has had over the NTT INDYCAR Series the last few years. It isn't just because of some of the different things we've had this year, like the hybrid and kind of being able to adapt well. It's because Alex Palou is just a stellar race car driver. I mean, being able to break through in the biggest way possible in the Indy 500 on an oval, I mean, that's phenomenal. I feel like that is going to give him, I don't want to say courage or confidence, because this man is a great race car driver. He has enough courage and confidence, but drivers always talk about that when you break through for that first win, no matter if it's like an oval win or a road course win or something like that, you know how to win. You know what every piece of the puzzle takes. And now I think that's going to transfer over into oval racing. And absolutely, I think it makes him up there with some of the greats.
It absolutely puts him up there with some of the greats of the Speedway. I think that Alex Palou came here in 2020, with the Elcoin Racing, and had a unfortunate end to his event in that race. But he came back the next year with Chip Ganassi Racing and nearly won his first that year. Unfortunately, got outclassed by the master of the Speedway, Elio Castroneves. But since then, Palou's, kind of gone through the ringer, much like Scott Dixon has at this racetrack. And it's really just rewarding to see a guy who has had such a bang-on year, just such an incredible, stellar season to this point, go out and kind of shake the oval monkey off his back, proverbially speaking. The guy has just done nothing but absolutely dominate the competition this year. And while the race still kind of looked like it had a pretty open ending there for a while, it seemed like after Palou took the lead and got behind those RLL cars to help him continue to save fuel, that the race was pretty much over, because as we know, Palou is teammates with the, illustrious Scott Dixon, and we all know how Scott Dixon is about saving fuel late in these races. I'm sure he's learned a thing or two from his veteran teammate in Palou. So, yeah, I just think that Alex Palou, you really got to tip your cap to him. Barry Wanzer and that entire 10 team at Chip Ganassi Racing, they put in a phenomenal effort all month of May long, and they ended it out putting their faces on the Borg Warner Trophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well-deserved victory for Alex Palou. And seeing how he won this race, like they always say, it was a surgical approach, because he wasn't out front dominating all day long, but he got to the front when it mattered the most. And on a day when it was difficult to make overtakes, I think once he got that out of the way, it was going to be really hard for Marcus Ericsson or anyone else behind him, David Malukas, to try to catch up to him, especially when you had the two RLO cars on the tail end of the lead lap. At the very front of the pack, Devlin DeFrancesco and Louis Foster battling for position. Some of the drivers were really frustrated, with what they were doing up there. They were like, hey, just get out of the way, and just let the leaders race. But, they decided to race amongst themselves, and that's that. But I'm sure those drivers are going to have a long memory when they think back at how those drivers racing. But getting back to Alex Palou on yesterday in the pre-race show, we were talking about how a driver's career, despite winning many IndyCar championships, how their career would not be complete without winning an Indianapolis 500. Now, Alex Palou has checked off that illustrious box from his career, so now we don't have to worry about it. Will Alex Palou win an Indy 500? And in regards to the championship itself, although Palou, has been dominating the road and street course to start the season, you would think his weakness would be an oval, right? Because he had not won an oval race entering this racing weekend. And now they, as you said, Tanner, got the oval monkey off his back. Now I think the competition has to be scared in the rest of the season. But now this guy can win on an oval, and so then now he can win on any type of track, whether it be a road, street course, oval track. Then I got some short ovals to finish out the season here. So I'm sure Alex Palou is now going to be considered a threat every single racing weekend, especially on the oval tracks now. And I do think that he is definitely going to put himself in history, alongside some of the all-time greats in the sport, as we mentioned, Dixon, Power, Hornet Jr., and DeFerrin, and also he's to continue to go on. He might be up there with the greats Mario Andretti, AJ Ford as well. Like, I think the sky is the limit for this guy, and he's only 28 years old, so he could. And look how old Will Power is right now, and Scott Dixon, in their mid 40s, still going strong, and Elio Castroneves, 50 years old, and Takuma Sato inching closer to age. So looking at 28-year-old Alex Palou, he could potentially do this another 15, 16, 17, 18, however long years. And yeah, so imagine how many race wins and championships he can get, assuming that he stays in IndyCar. No, 28 is kind of old to be in Formula One, but who really knows? Given how dominant he's been this year, an F1 team would be silly not to look at this guy for next year potentially. I wonder if he will get any more F1 opportunities. I know what happened with McLaren, a few years ago, left a sour taste in some of the F1 paddock miles, but we'll just have to wait and see if the F1 dream is dead for Alex Palou. I certainly think he would be a great addition to the F1 grid if that's in his future. In the race, well, before I move on, Dan and Life said you had fun at the 500. I'm really glad you enjoyed the show there. And next, moving on, the race ended under caution because Nolan Siegel crashed on the last lap, and I'm glad that a user on X posted a video of that since we missed it on the broadcast. It's nice to actually see what happened there. And as Siegel crashed on that final lap, Palou came around turn 4 in the yard of bricks to take the checker flag. It looked like Marcus Ericsson in second place was trying to make a move, but got loose exiting turn 3. This allowed David Malukas to close on him and Palou to run away with the victory. Pato Award said the race was not good, critical of the drivers up front during the restart, and said that Marcus Ericsson choked that went away with that spectacular last-second move by Alex Palou to take the lead out. It really looked like that Marcus Ericsson, was not anticipating that at all, and yeah, it was like he was heading into turn 1, then all of a sudden Alex Palou made this last-second lunge, and Ericsson he basically got caught with his pants down, so to speak, because nobody was expecting him to make a move. And we were also talking about on the pre-race show and the shows leading up to this, like with Alex Palou having such a big championship lead, could he have afforded to be more aggressive? And that was the rare aggressive move that we saw from Alex Palou, because traditionally you wouldn't expect to see something like that from him. So with all that said, do you agree with Pato O'Ward's take on the race? He's really become one of the most outspoken IndyCar drivers.
And as he should be, he is one of the stars of the sport, and as such should try to use that influence to help command direction of it. Now, as for the race itself and his assessment of it, I tend to agree. It was pretty bad, with all things considered. I do think that there were parts of the race that were good, but unfortunately, due to a combination of factors, such as, and we kind of touched on it during the opening of this question, Fox, they did a mediocre job at best. I'm probably being a little too nice, but I'll give them some credit. It was their first stab at this, but man, they really made the Indy 500 feel like just any other IndyCar race, which that's just not ideal. So on top of all that, I just think the racing product was not up to snuff. I don't think that passing was tremendously easy. It almost felt more like a NASCAR race where, you kind of have guys really risking it all on every restart just because passing is such a, laborious task. But at the end of the day, you had a long green flag run to the finish, which you'd normally prefer to see. And, that was marked by a bunch of green flag pit stops that kind of made things interesting. And we ultimately ended up with Ericsson getting up front there with enough fuel to end the race without any troubles. But I was kind of surprised he didn't try to pass the RLL cars. And I guess he did once and then kind of gave up after that. I really didn't like how the RLL cars kind of stunk up that finish, though I understood why they were there and what they were doing. It's just that, I guess for the true racing spirit of the end there, it would have been nice to have seen those like four cars kind of get to battle it out, maybe even allow Rosenquist to kind of get back into the battle there. But at the end of the day, I think the hybrid unit hasn't had enough oval reps to this point, and the teams haven't quite mastered the setups around it. And ultimately, I think that the race kind of suffered because of it, which is really unfortunate. But as far as Indy 500s, I feel like I've watched in my lifetime, it had the worst vibes, I would say, of all of them. And just in general, the racing product left a lot to be desired. And it just seemed like even if you wanted to make a move at the end, you couldn't.
Yeah, I think you hit a lot of good points there, because it was right. Like, on some of the flat tracks in NASCAR, we've seen leaders get stuck behind lap cars. We saw the same thing there at the finish, where it just looked like Marcus Ericsson just wanted to pass those two RLL cars, but just couldn't do anything. And I mean, just couldn't really do much, but I really think that's the way some races go. You're going to have great races. The Indy 500 has been on a great stretch. 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024 were all fantastic races. 2019, even before, there was a great stretch of races for this race. So, I mean, you're going to have a couple that aren't up to snuff. And like you talked about with working on the setups around the hybrid unit, these teams are going to come back and be better and be stronger and advocate for changes too after, 500 miles of basically real world testing. Like I trust that this race will be better next year. And even so, I thought this race was solid to some extent, seeing how the different strategies were playing out, who could win. Ryan Hunter-Reay looked like
I think you're muted, Jonathan.
There we go. Sorry about that. My mic had an issue. Ryan Hunter-Reay looked like he had a chance of winning until that disastrous pit stop. Newgarden coming up through the field. I mean, there were a lot of storylines throughout the race.
There go your mic again, Jonathan.
That's pretty much it. Palou was just better.
Yeah. And I do think Paddle War certainly brought up some good points here, and the race on track product itself, was honestly not the best thing we've seen in recent memory at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And Tanner, I do agree, hybrid unit probably had something to do with this, just like we've seen on the road and street courses. Those races used to be really unpredictable and lots of moving throughout the field, but this time, it seemed like you had to go big on the restarts. It seemed like that was the only time you could really make a genuine pass. And then once it got spread out, you could see drivers get close and they got stuck in that bubble of dirty air, and they really couldn't do much with that, which was super unfortunate. So hopefully by the time next year Indy 500 rolled around, they'll have even more work done on this hybrid engine, so we can potentially see a much better on-track product. And as I said in our private chat yesterday, I believe that this race kind of reminded me of the 2020 Indy 500. The first race with the aero screen, and when we had the aero screen on for the first time, it seemed like the on-track product suffered. Then they continued to work on that, where the aero screen wasn't much of an issue. And after that, we saw a handful of good racing in the Indianapolis 500. So I'm hopeful that history is going to repeat itself here, and that by the time next year roll around, the racing will be a lot better. But certainly, I was a little disappointed with the way the on-track product turned out here. And in regards to DeFrancesco and Foster battling for position, it would have been nice to see them, go into the backstretch and go low and, just lift off the gas and let the leaders fight it out amongst themselves. But at the same time, they're under no obligation to do that, because IndyCar doesn't have the blue flag rules, where you need to pull aside and let the leader through, like you see in, series like Formula One. So DeFrancesco and Foster, they don't have to do that at all, but it certainly would have been courteous. And as I said a short while ago, I think it would have probably would have been in their best interest to do that, from a competitor standpoint, because those drivers, they're going to remember, that in the future. So when Louis Foster, the former Indy Next champion, if he goes up there, Ray Hall, and eventually gets in a car capable of winning on most weeks, and Louis Foster's out in the lead, I'm sure some of those drivers are going to have, that short memory. They're going to be like, hey, I remember when Louis Foster was towards the front of that battle at the Indy 500, holding up the leader. So when Louis Foster's in a different car in the future, battling for a win in someone's lap car, they're going to be like, hey, I remember what Louis did, so I'm going to hold him up the same way he held up the leaders that day. So it could certainly, cause some issues down the road. And I think it's just a matter of respect there, which, some of the drivers after the race were getting at. They should have just, let the leaders battle out amongst themselves. And Marcus Ericsson choking the way to win there, as Pato said. I think the best way I would just characterize it, Marcus just caught off guard there. I guess you could say, he choked the win away, but he certainly did not see that coming from Alex Palou, and neither did I. Given how difficult it was to pass, I honestly thought Palou was going to get stuck in a bubble of dirty air, but Palou, he's a student of the game. He studied Marcus there and sized him up, and that was that at the end. And I believe he had something else to add, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching the two RLL cars just swap positions with each other, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, that could be the race. That could be the race for the win, and we're not getting it. It was so, frustrating. But I think we have a comment from Ben, too.
Consensus I saw was that the booth was okay, but the rest of the production was atrocious. Totally agree with that. I put it in our comments here during our little private chat that for the IndyCar season to this point, Fox has done well to not fox everything up like they normally do, but they foxed everything up to 11 with Indy. The nonsense AI animation at the beginning of the race during pre-race, just the lack of positional awareness with the camera. Like we had a 5-second still shot of the pit attenuator while no cars were passing it with less than 10 laps to go. Really felt like NASCAR on Fox in that moment. Totally agree with what appears to be the consensus. The broadcast was really just not all the way there. But again, it is their first go around. I'm going to hope that they come back next year with a notebook and concerted effort to do a little bit better next time.
Yes, certainly. And also Fox released a brand new ad this morning with Alex Palou. I don't know if you guys saw that. And that new ad, it shows Alex Palou kissing the bricks, and Fox has a title: "You never forget your first kiss." So it's smart marketing employed there by them. So that's one positive you can take away from Fox in this situation. And Adam Limmery said that Alex Palou is on another level right now. He's incredible. Yeah, Alex Palou is on a few different levels right now, and the rest of the field wondering what can they do to beat this guy. And speaking of getting beat, the Speedway beat one guy yesterday before the race even started. The driver who had the absolute worst day at Indianapolis, and probably the worst day in motorsports for a driver in a very long time, was Scott McLaughlin. Yesterday on our pre-race show, we talked about the rookie Robert Schwartzman starting on pole and trying to avoid a Scott Sharp situation from 2001. He didn't, but Marco Andretti crashed towards the back of the initial start in turn one. For McLaughlin, he pulled a Roberto Guerrero and crashed out. During the pace laps, McLaughlin lost control, getting heat into his tires, hit the inside wall, and was devastated to be out before the green flag. And a lot of that devastation, we talked about it on our shows leading up to the race. Scott McLaughlin's worked really hard to get better, at oval racing, especially here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And he's been working very closely with Simon Pagenaud, who's been mentoring him, trying to teach him how to navigate this race. So you know how hard Scott McLaughlin has put into this race, and to seemingly, let down Simon after all of those, months of hard work he's done behind the scenes with Simon to prepare for this race. You really saw that when he got out of the car and just really dropped to his knees in complete and utter devastation. Jonathan, starting you on this one, what will it take for McLaughlin to forget that mistake?
Keep going forward. I mean, going into Detroit, he's one of the favorites to win. Really, truly, he's a great race car driver. That was just a freak mistake, freak accident, freak thing happening with cold track temperatures. Anybody could have that could happen to anybody. It could happen to Joseph Newgarden, could happen to Alex Palou, it could happen to Marcus Ericsson, it could happen to anybody. It just happened to be him in that moment, at that time. It just keep going. Team Penske is one of the greatest race teams on earth, one of the most successful. And there are probably a half dozen people when he gets back to the shop telling him, "Hey man, that was rough, but you're one of the best drivers out there. You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Let's go out and win this race. Just keep going."
I think that it would behoove him to probably make at least one visit to a sports psychologist after this, because, it's better to not just suffer through something like this alone and to talk to a professional about it. Not only that, I do think it helps that, his car owner owns the racetrack, so he can kind of go back and visit it a little bit in the interim between this year's race and next year's race, and kind of just sit there with it, reckon with it, kind of, get his bearings back underneath him, because, that's just a devastating incident, especially when you have drivers on the radio, taking pot shots at you because you had a very just once-in-a-lifetime disaster. I just think that it would be best if McLaughlin just kind of put this behind him. I mean, it was a freak accident. Like, this doesn't happen to, three-time Supercars champions very often. And I just think that it would behoove him to, as Jonathan kind of said, move forward and move on from the incident. Next week, you have another race, another opportunity to get yourself moving in the right direction this season, past this last place finish, and just honestly past the pretty difficult early part of the schedule for that 3 team after that incident at Thermal, as well with Devlin DiFrancesco. So, with a lot of ovals coming up in the second half of the IndyCar season, I think that McLaughlin will obviously find his footing and, find the path back to victory lane. But Sunday was certainly one of the toughest chapters in his young career.
You have anything you want to add, Jonathan?
No, that was a great point about the sports psychologist. Yeah, being able to get in the right place and talk it out was really good.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a really smart idea for Scott McLaughlin to consult with a sports psychologist, because it's easy to understand why this moment will completely wreck your confidence from a mental standpoint. I think Jeff Gluck from The Athletic said it best. I hope Scott McLaughlin doesn't watch this clip and think that he sucks as a race car driver, because he absolutely does not suck at all. Like you're saying, Tanner, he's a multi-time supercars champion, and for him to make the transition for supercars into open wheel racing, which is a completely different world. It's been remarkable that he's been, as good as he has been in IndyCar in a relatively short amount of time, because you think a driver coming from supercars going to open wheel racing, something, never really done, you don't think that it would go well. But McLaughlin, he's become a full-blown IndyCar driver, as he said last year, after he won his very first oval race. So it was an unfortunate accident. Obviously it was extremely embarrassing for Scott McLaughlin, especially when you're driving for Roger Penske, the guy who not only your team owner, the guy who owns the IndyCar Series and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So if you want to go to a track and perform well, this is the track to do it. And for him to crash out in this embarrassing and low moment, it was definitely really tough for him. And that was basically, summed up what this month of May has been for Team Penske. We already know what happened, before the top 12 qualifying session, with Power. Newgarden fell in the pre-qualifying technical inspection, getting sent to the back of the row. And then Team Penske in general, not a good day yesterday. Newgarden, he was charging from the back before he had an issue. And then Will Power was basically non-existent and invisible all race long. And then Scott McLaughlin ended up crashing right before the start. Just an unfortunate situation for him. But I'm confident that McLaughlin is going to bounce back from this, and just thinks, next year you get another chance to go to the Indy 500, and he should use what happened yesterday, as motivation to move forward. And I know it's easier said than done, to just say move forward, because I'm sure he's going to be hurt for a very long time over this. But next year, there's an opportunity to make it right and try to go out there and win the Indy 500. I think if he goes out there, wins the Indy 500 next year or in the future, he'll certainly be able to move on from this, and this will just be just one small embarrassing moment that really didn't mean a lot in the grand scheme of things. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, there were a few scary moments that occurred on the pit road. Robert Schwartzman came into his pit box too fast and collided with his pit crew. He was done for the day with car damage. One of his crew members was taken away on a stretcher and complaining about pain in his foot. Alexander Rossi had a fire in his pit box. The fielder was okay, but he was taken to the infield care center for further evaluation. Then Rennes VK lost his brakes entering the pits and crashed into the wall. Thankfully, the first few pit stalls entering pit road were empty and nobody else was on pit road at the time. We know pit road is narrow, especially when NASCAR shows up. Should IMS consider widening pit road and revisiting safety protocols after these scary incidents, or honestly, is there really much they can do here?
I don't think that would have prevented any of the incidents that happened. I mean, the fuel fire, that's just, happenstance and an awful accident that thankfully didn't, get worse than it was. But as far as VK, I almost wonder with VK if, who was it? Was it Rossi that came in right before that and was obviously like kind of spitting oil out on the track? It's possible that he probably like left something on the track, because like to just try to go down pit road and have zero brakes is insane to me. But at the same time, I don't think that would have made the VK crash any better or any worse. To have like let's say like a 5 or 10 foot wider pit lane. I don't think that would have mattered much. And as far as the Schwartzman incident, it's weird because he, number one, has the very first pit stall, so he's going to have the best exit possible. And he had already done one live pit stop to that point at this track and had, outside of his right rear tire changer having a gun malfunction, seemed to be doing very well. And the second time he comes down, I don't know what happened. He just misjudged it or what have you, and unfortunately got into some of his crew, and unfortunately one of them ended up having to get stretchered away. But obviously the pit road incidents kind of dominated the headlines a little bit throughout the day, but I don't know if a wider pit lane would have really contributed to anything different in any of those situations. It's just unfortunate what happened. Now, if you want to say they should widen it for NASCAR's purposes because they intend to continue hosting NASCAR races, then yeah, maybe there's an argument there. But even then, they go to even narrower pit lanes at Charlotte, or at least it seems like it, and at COTA especially. COTA is a very, very tight and cramped pit lane. But yeah, I just think that with the 3 incidents we had yesterday, I don't know if that widening of the pit lane really makes a whole lot of sense. But at the same time, if they can afford it space-wise, I don't see why you don't do it.
Yeah, I think that, the IMS pit road being narrow, being tight, that's kind of another feature of the track, another challenge, another thing that drivers have to face, and crews have to face. And so, yeah, I don't think there would have been anything that would have really prevented that at all, really, to just look at it as just feature of the track, challenge of the track. Yeah, you hit on some good points there, Tanner.
Yeah, and also these crew members know what they sign up for as well, because we often forget, that this is a very dangerous sport, and not just on the track, but in the pits as well. And anytime the cars are coming down pit road, the pits, regardless of what stage they're in, there's always a chance that you're gonna get hit by a car. And in this situation of Robert Schwartzman, it was like he was a bowling ball knocking down bowling pins there, with all his crew members going down there. So this is a risk, and danger that is present in motorsports, and all of these crew members, they know this every single time. And I agree with both of you that widening the pit lane probably wouldn't have changed that. Even if it was a wider pit lane, there was Robert Schwartzman was coming in so fast, it would have definitely still struck his crew members regardless of what happened there. And just to sum it all up, the race was obviously broadcast on Fox for the first time. It had 7 cautions for 45 laps, and Takuma Sato led the most laps at 51. Joseph Newgarden, as I mentioned, was charging from the last row into the top 10, but fuel pressure issues cut his day short. Kyle Larson ended up crashing out on lap 92, and some of the other notable drivers who had disappointing finishes: Colton Herta, 17, Will Power, 19, as I mentioned, he was invisible, and Scott Dixon, 23rd, who had brake issues, which put him 3 laps down. And then Pato O'Ward is now second in the championship, 115 points behind Alex Palou. And given how large Palou's lead is, he could theoretically skip the next 2 races at Detroit and Gateway. He could celebrate his Indy 500, go on a multi-week vacation, and still be the points leader. Jonathan, overall, how will you remember the 100-night running of the Indianapolis 500?
Well, the way I summed it up on the raceexperts.com on the story that I had was that it was a race of survival. The first half had so many different things happening back to back to back to back to back. Even with Takuma Sato, who still finished the race, like he had issues on pit road, fell back, was never heard from for the rest of the race. It was a race of survival, which honestly is pretty on brand for the 500. Because you remember, I know a lot of people were talking about how in the first half, the race kind of reminded them of 1992. Like the 1992 race, I think had something like 12 or 13 like finishers out of the 33 starters. Like it was a race of survival, and really having to execute every single thing just right. And the guy, as we mentioned, who executed just right was Alex Palou. Wasn't the most compelling race from a pure racing standpoint, but it was survival and you had to execute.
I tend to agree with Jonathan on that it was definitely like a race of attrition and thus survival for those that, obviously didn't get caught up in anything. But I wrote down a few words that kind of help describe the event. So pace lap pandemonium, obviously. We had Dixon's fire through his brake well there. Really weird once in a lifetime incident that also happens to Scott Dixon at Indianapolis after another strong month. Completely put him out of the race before it even got started. And then obviously the McLaughlin incident that we talked about earlier, which also leads into Penske imperfect. They did not have any competition for it seemed like the whole month until that double penalty there that they got for Newgarden and Power. And it seemed like Power was just trying to follow Newgarden through the pack and just wasn't able to really do it. Clearly kind of fell down the order once those two got separated. And then Newgarden with that fuel pressure issue in that last stint while he was still making a charge. I think everybody in attendance and watching at home would have liked to have seen him be able to see what he could do there towards the finish, but unfortunately just got cut short. The double DNF for Kyle Larson unfortunately lost his race at Indy due to a mistimed downshift that put him out of the event, and then went to NASCAR and kind of had his night unravel there. Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan shenanigans, and no passing. So that would be pretty much how I'd describe the 109th running of the Indy 500. But the one that sticks out the most, and the one that'll obviously have the most enduring legacy, is that Alex Palou, winner, fried chicken dinner for the 5th out of 6 races in the 2025 calendar thus far. An absolutely unparalleled run by the young Spaniard, and he's just having the year of years that we've seen in IndyCar probably in all of our lifetimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll remember this year's Indy 500 a bit in the race, where not even Elva could stop Alex Palou from continuing to grow his championship lead and dominate the series. And as I said earlier, I think that this is a sign of things to come the rest of the season. I know usually, Joe likes to ask at various points of the season throughout the series we cover in the grid ranking, does he have one hand on the championship? I think it's fair to say after the Indy 500, does he have one hand on the championship? I think, yeah, Jonathan thinks he has both hands on the championship at this point. Yeah, I know it's really early, not even in June yet, but it seems like Alex Palou certainly has this championship under control. At the moment, I would be shocked at this point, even with this many races to go, if he is not the champion at the end of the year. But with that said, there's still a lot of racing to go. We'll see if the competition can try to catch up to him. But going through the order, Takuma Sato at the beginning of the race, it looked like he was going to be one of the main contenders to win. If it wasn't for the issue on pit road, I wonder if Sato would have been up there at the end to potentially win this third Indy 500. So unfortunate mistake there on the day, difficult where passing was difficult. So Sato wasn't really able to recover from that. Joseph Newgarden, I really hate I didn't see his on board from the start of the race, because the move from 32nd start position into the top 10, I believe it was he got as high as been in the top 5 at one point. For him to come from the last row that far up, I was just like, wow, this dude is absolutely flying. And if it wasn't for failing pre-qualifying inspection and he was able to qualify in that section, I wonder if we'd be talking about 3-time consecutive Indy 500 winner Joseph Newgarden. It seemed like he certainly had one of the best cars out there to potentially win this race, but unfortunately track position was key, and despite starting from the very back and trying to march towards the front, I wonder if dirty air would have been too much for Joseph Newgarden to get up there to try to fight Alex Palou if it wasn't for the issue that put him out of the race, because he was definitely coming before that issue ended his race. And then Kyle Larson, unfortunate situation there, crashing out right before the halfway point. And honestly, I was thinking to myself, maybe this crash was a blessing in disguise for him, because looking at the time the Indy 500 finish, he would have had to, retire the car early to get to Charlotte. So there was no way Kyle Larson was going to be able to go the distance, if it wasn't for the crash. So it was just an unfortunate situation. I know we were talking about this amongst ourselves on our private chat, saying that Kurt Busch's double effort, over a decade ago was not respected enough because of what he was able to do, go to Indy, get a top 10 finish. He was knocking on the door, the top 5. I know Kurt Busch had a late practice crash, able to recover from that, ended up having a flawless race. Then, he went to Charlotte to try to complete the double and had an issue there where, end up not finishing the NASCAR race there. And in order for this double to work, I know you guys are going to talk more about it during the NASCAR section. I just wanted to say, in order for this to work, you need the perfect storm because and unfortunate for Larson, 2 years in a row, rain really dampened things. A late start to the Indy 500 last year, it ended up, putting a damper on his plans. And then this year, rain delayed it for an entire hour. And then I wonder what's worse, crashing out before halfway or not crashing out and then having to park the car earlier. It's just a real unfortunate situation for him. Then Colton Herta, that backup car, obviously wasn't, like his primary. Tough day for him. Willpower, he didn't run well. And, little David Malukas finished on the podium in the Indy 500. Great bounce back for AJ Fort Racing as well. And Santino Ferrucci's top 10 streak lives on another year. And given where they were at the start of qualifying, I think that number 14 team can be very proud where they finish, and with Will Power having an invisible day. I wonder if the rumors are going to start back up about David Malukas potentially replacing Will Power at Team Penske next year. I know Will Buxton was talking a lot about that in the booth yesterday, you know, about Malukas. You know, we talked about how the number 4 teams had a quiet start to the season, not really looking good for it. Then Malukas shines while Will Power basically does nothing all day in this car. And then Scott Dixon, unfortunate situation, you know, with him on the pace lap with the brake fire as well. But well, I'm sure we'll see Scott Dixon bounce back as well. And just to bring it all back, Alex Palou, great job winning that Indy 500 title. And I think he'll probably add another title to his resume later on at the end of the season. What was so funny there, Tanner?
Kobe, I think talking about Kyle Larson having a perfect storm for the, for the Indy 500 double to go right.
It's going to turn into a show of attrition.
Yeah.
Knocking him out.
Yeah, like I'm sure he doesn't want to hear the word storm cell, drizzle, any sort of precipitation. He doesn't want to hear anything about that for like probably the rest of the year.
Yeah, probably. And it's just a situation where you needed everything to go right. You need the race to start on time. You don't need to have any big crashes that could cause a red flag. You need to have a relatively clean race by the entire field. Yeah, you need to have perfect weather, and you need to just go in, do your job, and go out to Charlotte, and then go do your job there. But unfortunate that 2 years in a row, weather has ruined the double for him. And I'm sure a lot of people have been wondering if there anything can be done in the future to accommodate, the double attempt. Like maybe start the Indy 500 earlier in the day. I know Green Flag was scheduled for 12:46 p.m. Eastern time. Maybe if they move that back to let's say 12:15 in the future. I know the Indy 500 used to start earlier in the day in the past. Maybe if they went back to the old start time, that would potentially give a driver attempting a double more room to work with if there is a weather delay, because the window, is just too short. I know Larson was talking about how logistically speaking, this is just a very hard thing to pull off. And in Kurt Busch's case, he had the perfect storm over a decade ago. The race started at a good time. It didn't run too long. He was able to do Indy, get out of there, with enough time to land and, in Charlotte for the pre-race ceremonies.
Yes, Charlotte pre-race ceremonies. Before we get into that, though, comment in the chat room. I think it's been saying, in the words of David Land, noon start time. Of course, always something else going on when you're juggling TV interests, the networks, all that. But at the end of the day, tradition, I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to motorsports, and especially the Indianapolis 500. A tradition for many, after the Indianapolis 500, they tune in for the Coca-Cola 600. And for Ross Chastain, oh my goodness, what an effort, going from essentially crashing and qualifying, going to a backup car, having to go to the backup car because NASCAR said, no, you got it. That's too much damage. 40th? Yes, 40th. A full 40 grid field to the win on Sunday night with a handful of laps to go. He took the lead from William Byron in the Coca-Cola 600. What an effort by Ross Chastain. What an effort by his team. Great last pit stop. And the crew chief for making the call. We're going to pit later so we could use those fresher tires and run down a dominant William Byron. Byron looked really good, putting the moves to try to block him. But then when you had Denny Hamlin approach, who had gone a lap down, Chastain made an aggressive move to take the lead. What a difference in this race when it came down to it. Tanner, I got to ask you, how impressed were you with Chastain and his team to do that late pit stop and catch William Byron?
So I don't know if this was in Ross Chastain's front stretch interview after he won or if it was in Prime's official post-race coverage, but apparently him staying out late was an accident. There was apparently some sort of miscommunication between Chastain and crew chief Phil Surgeon on when to pit. So Chastain stayed out for 2 more laps longer than he was intended to. And unfortunately for him, those 2 laps, though they put him behind William Byron by 8 seconds by the time he rejoined the racetrack, those 2 laps, fresher rubber, absolutely played a pivotal part in the finish of this race. Ross Chastain put on an absolute clinic that unfortunately we didn't get to see a whole lot of because, you know, the focus of the race is always going to be up closer toward the front. And for much of the day, we watched the 11 and the 24 battle it out at the front of the field, with the 77 of Carson Hocevar also joining in the battle after he came from the last row with Ross Chastain up to the front. And, you know, to kind of touch on that, Carson Hocevar, what a tremendously unfortunate day for him. Had the run of his life going on through 450 miles, and to lose it on a blown engine right at the beginning of the last stage, right as your pit crew puts you on the front row for the last 100 lap dash to the finish. Just heartbreaking. But I do think that a loss like this makes a young driver like him a lot stronger. But to put the focus back on the Melon Man, he put on just one of the greatest displays of NASCAR racing I think we've seen probably in most of our lifetimes. To come from dead last on the grid all the way to the front in the Coca-Cola 600, it is just immaculate. Like, it's something that we'll probably never see again. And we're talking about a guy that did this all in a backup car after his initial car was topping the charts in multiple 5-lap, 10-lap, 15 and 25 lap segments. You know, how good he was running with that original car. To have his whole team cobble together a race car in less than 24 hours to get it fitted and prepared for the grid. And not only that, to create what ends up being the winning race car in a team that has struggled for comfortability in their cars, has struggled for pace in their cars. It's an incredible story. And I really hope that, you know, everybody, including myself, that's going to be, you know, writing a detailed recap of that race last night and is trying to really sell the story of the race. I really hope that they really focus in on the effort and the just sheer determination that Ross Chastain and the Trackhouse racing team put together this weekend, because it really can't be understated how Herculean of a task that Ross Chastain was put up to and how he met it.
In fact, I want to give a shout out to Seth Eggert of Motorsports Reference. Across NASCAR's 3 National Touring Series, only 7 drivers have officially been credited with starting last and winning. And Ross was the first one to ever do it in the NASCAR Cup Series. The other times it was done, Tyler Reddick, Xfinity Series, Bristol 2019, Bobby Hamilton, Trucks, Daytona 2005, Tommy Houston, Hickory, Xfinity 1992, Rich Petty at Richmond back in 1971. Last time it was ever done, the NASCAR Cup Series. I mean, that's phenomenal. And it really speaks to what Ross has done this season, where he has grinded out some great finishes. You look at Texas, where he finished second after starting, my gosh, like outside of the top 20, top 25, didn't really show much in practice. You know, he's had some other really great finishes. He's 8th in points right now, and not to diss his teammates, I think this speaks more to where Trackhouse is than anything, but he is 8th in points right now, while his teammate is 30th. His other teammate is 33rd in points. I mean, it's just spectacular what Ross is doing this whole season here, and being able to beat a Hendrick car too on the long run, one that's been leading all night, and being able to defend, and just what a drive. What a drive. What a talented, you know, Ross Chastain is, and what a great display.
Great display of driving by Ross Chastain and that team. And as he brought up the struggles we saw at Trackhouse, and how it was a few races ago where Chastain said, we finally got the car comfortable and I felt like Superman. I could do stuff. And we saw that again at Charlotte Motor Speedway. What an effort it could be to turn around that team needs and potentially translate down to Suarez, to Shane Van Gisbergen, who Shane Van Gisbergen, got to say, you know, had a pretty solid run yesterday as well. at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Now, one driver looked like he was going to run well. Kyle Larson started out up front row, started second, which we know traditionally drivers that have done that double, Mr. Driver's Me, start in the back. Kyle Larson did not have that disadvantage. Goes out there, gets a lead, 4-second lead, and I thought this is going to be the Kyle Larson show. He's just going to dominate and pull away. But then he hits the wall. He keeps running, though, and was showing no sign of slowing down. Then he spins around. That's where we learn, okay, there's something up with the car. Later on, he crashes out. He did less than 600 miles combined yesterday. To be specific, 595 out of the 1,100 miles. So again, it was a disappointing day. Last year, he missed the Coca-Cola 600 completely. This year, he got in, but just did not work out. I remember last year, he said he felt he let so many people down. Now, Jonathan, seeing Kyle Larson struggle, I know you all talked a bit about it on the IndyCar. Does this remind everyone how challenging the double is? I mean, essentially that perfect storm analogy. And overall, do you see anybody else planning to do the double anytime soon, whether it's a full-time NASCAR or even throw out full-time IndyCar driver?
You know, when you ask that question, that reminds me of when I was at my occupational therapist in my hand. I told them about Kyle Larson doing the 1,100-mile double, and they were like, wow, I couldn't even do that in my car, you know, like, let alone doing it at full speed, you know, and it's incredible. Like, it really is an incredible feat, and it's hard, you know, and I think Kyle Larson is also a very mental driver, and I know he ran well early on in that race, but just to have a mistake like that early on in the race where, you know, he got into the wall and then eventually spun after that, gosh, you know, it's so tough, like, to overcome the struggles that you may face in one race to do well in another. Like we talked about with Kurt Busch, he had the perfect storm of everything where he was able to run a really good, clean, problem-free race, which is, as we learned this year, is not easy in the Indy 500. And then he went to Charlotte where, again, you know, he had an engine issue. Anything can go wrong. Anything can happen. And I really think that, yeah, Kyle Larson struggling yesterday, one of the greatest drivers in the whole world. It is a challenge doing the double, and it really brings greater respect to what Tony Stewart did back in the day when he was able to complete all 1,100 miles.
Yeah, I think that the kind of like recency bias we have with it, with so many nearly successful runs. Obviously, Kurt Busch's comes to mind, where had it not been for a blown motor, he probably ends that race on a lead lap and completes all 1,100 miles for Tony Stewart's race team at the time. Unfortunately, though, for Kyle Larson, that would not be the case this Sunday. I do agree with Jonathan that it really brings into scope truly how difficult this task is. Not just the, you know, wear and tear of the day itself, where you have to do so much travel. You are, in a sense, living on a clock and having to be mindful of when the race starts, when the race ends, you know, kind of what else is happening during the race. It's a lot to really juggle in your mind, on top of, I'm trying to win the greatest spectacle in racing. On top of that, you go from trying to win the greatest spectacle in racing to running the longest race that exists in oval racing in the Coca-Cola 600, which in itself is a feat of strength. That's why you see a lot of drivers get, you know, some of their first starts in NASCAR at the Cup Series level at the Coca-Cola 600. Team owners want to make sure that you have the stamina and the determination to get through those 600 miles over 400 laps around the very ruthless and, you know, bumpy Charlotte Motor Speedway. So I think it really brought into perspective, even with how talented Kyle Larson is, as I've talked about on this program many times before, he is cartoonishly talented. But unfortunately, we saw the other side of that coin for him, where he makes some cartoonishly poor mistakes that ultimately took him out of both races. And granted, I do think he may have had a shot to come back in the Coke 600 had he not gotten clipped in that crash. It looked like he was starting to at least make up some spots, and we've seen that Hendrick Motorsports bunch obviously bounce back from Larson tearing the car up or a mechanical error of some kind, come back and, you know, win races, even at the Roval in particular. But at the same time, again, a big reminder that the NASCAR Cup Series is nothing to fool with, especially at this rough and tumble oval that we went to last night. And the Indianapolis is still the driver's racetrack for open wheel. And unfortunately, both of them kind of bit Kyle Larson yesterday. And I hope it doesn't dissuade drivers in the future from doing the double, but you know, I can kind of see after the logistical nightmares that we've seen in the last 2 years how difficult it's going to be to pull off.
Very tricky to pull off. Go to a couple comments in the chat room. Encourage everyone to participate in the chat room. Love to share your opinions and questions on the air. First great win from Chastain. I could say in prime first time production of a NASCAR event. Made Fox production look second rate. One more good thing results. SVG 14th place. Beware the supercar NASCAR invasion the next few months.
Beware.
That's always going to be exciting, especially with the road courses coming up. And when I mentioned about a driver from IndyCar maybe doing the double, throwing Scotty Mack in the IndyCar driver side is the one to do it. With Penske, I think overall we got to see this where with Roger Penske, Scott McLaughlin, he's driven Joey Logano's 22 car of Surfer's Paradise years ago. I don't see why he shouldn't be able to be considered to do a NASCAR Cup Series race, and it was the Coca-Cola 600. I would assume that might be coming after if Scott McLaughlin had already won the Indy 500, because I think the thing that makes the Indy 500 and the double so hard, NASCAR Charlotte, you practice once, then you go to qualifying, that's it. Then you go race. The Indianapolis 500 is the month of May. It's months of testing, then the week-long practice session. You're losing time from your NASCAR effort, from whatever other series you're running. And you put in all this work, and then at the end of the day, it could be as simple as weather gets in the way and you got to bail. I just think that is such an intense pressure situation where you're just in the car. It's like, I just spent the month of May here going back and forth, and to try to potentially give up the biggest race or another commitment, just really tough situation. And I hope we see more drivers consider the double. It'll be really hard to tell, and especially with I think I've been going, especially with Penske. I mean, this was not the Penske perfect type weekend at all. 17 cars finished on the lead lap at the Coca-Cola 600. 8 cars were out, and Team Penske, boy, Blaney crashed out when that big one that took out Suarez and Kyle Larson. Austin Cindric, 31st, just not a factor. I think a lot of people were paying attention to him. We know even the Amazon Prime crew, they were asking how was the firing of his dad be a factor. They said, not really, just go out there, go get your race wins that you need to do, perform. He did not perform yesterday. Joey Logano, last car on the lead lap, finished in 17th place. Byron, after the race, had some interesting comments about Logano doing his own thing up front ahead of the leaders, trying to stay on the lead lap. I have to ask you, Tanner, considering what happened at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, there are some reports that Penske had an all meeting with the NASCAR team as well, too. Then, of course, the penalties, the fire of Tim Cindric. Was this all a factor, distraction in Penske poor performance? Or did the NASCAR side just miss the setup as an organization for Charlotte?
Without getting into it too much, I did hear from someone through the grapevine that would be privy to this knowledge that Roger, I don't know if he had a meeting necessarily, but there was certainly a message sent to the organization to be in compliance this weekend, especially after everything got drummed up throughout the week. I just think that when your team has been accused of exploiting the gray area in one sport and you are a multi-sport team, you tend to want to protect the integrity of your race team, whether right or wrong. As I mentioned last week in multiple broadcasts, I just think that every team, it's their responsibility to go out there and win every week, or at least do their best to put their best foot forward or best wheel, because it's racing. And I think part of that is, exploiting those gray areas, bending the envelope, pushing everything as hard as you can in the rule book to try to make your car go fast and, put your competitors behind you. But even with everything that happened this week, I still stand by that. Clearly, it didn't seem that this cosmetic application that they added to the attenuator in IndyCar didn't really make much of a difference in aerodynamics or really anything. It was just an aesthetic thing, which if you are familiar with Team Penske, it's pretty that's pretty on the nose for them. That's something that you could really point to with them being very neurotic about, how they look and how they come across. But I just think that with RP facing all this pressure in his racing series, he wanted to make sure that he didn't draw any more attention to himself during the week. He wanted the focus of the weekend to be on his drivers and the event itself. And fortunately, he got that just for all the wrong reasons in terms of a poor performance for really all 6 of his cars. The best one that came out of a Penske shop over the weekend would have been Josh Berry, and he was like routinely the last car on the lead lap for most of the night, and didn't really climb up to 12th until the end of the race. So yeah, it was definitely not a banner effort for the Penske Perfect squads, but if you're in Roger Penske's shoes, you probably wouldn't want to keep drawing the ire of race fans and race media everywhere.
Yeah, and someone mentioned on the broadcast too, I believe it might have been Steve Letarte, that, they push every limit with the tolerances and work in the gray area. And I think coming into the weekend, just knowing everything, they probably dialed some speed out of those cars, so that way there wasn't any controversy. And also too, Steve Letarte talked about how I guess I'm Tanner now. All right, that's cool. We're trading places. There we go. But yeah, they go to every limit, every little bit. And Steve talked about how throughout a race, especially at Charlotte, where there's a lot of bumps, you're running for 600 miles, something could get knocked out of place and you fail post-race tech inspection, you get disqualified. As we've actually seen with the Penske car this year, with Joey Logano failing tech, at Talladega and losing his finish. Or even the dreaded, these cars have been taken back to the R&D center for further inspection. Just ask Brad Keselowski about that with Chris Buescher. It's just some sort of disqualification or something like that happening would not have been a good look, like you mentioned, Tanner, for Penske. And so I think just dialing back, set up a little bit, just biting the bullet. Blaney's well enough above the cut line. Cindric's got to win. Logano's got to win. Barry's got to win. Just lay low. And I think that might even happen this weekend at Nashville coming up.
That would be something else if Nashville is another race where they're just laying low. You also got for IndyCar Detroit coming up. That's a big race for Roger Penske. Detroit, Michigan, home of Chevrolet, home of Penske, essentially, where he started his big empire with Michigan International Speedway for a long time before that was sold off. I think for Penske, this next 2 to 3 weeks is going to be really interesting to see what happens with the IndyCar and the NASCAR team effort. Are they going to lay low? I know the ovals, Joseph Newgarden is always so good. I think he's going to be a potential contender for that. Will Power not having that great of a year, and then when you look at the NASCAR side, Blaney's still winless. Just bad luck. I feel bad luck has been a big key. Even with Josh Berry, he got that win out of Vegas. He has fast cars, but just seen some mistake here, mistake there, wrong pit call here, robs him from good results. For Trackhouse, they made the right call, even though it was accidental. Got to Byron, got the win. They are now locked in the playoffs, and potentially that could be a big moment in the season and changing things up. With that said, of course, this was part of Memorial Day weekend, so we'll bring Kobe in because that means we also had Formula One to kick off the day, and unfortunately, might be the last time we see F1 to kick off the day. We need to have a new race to have breakfast with starting next year, I guess.
Yeah, I guess if you look at this year's schedule, I guess we'll say breakfast in Silverstone, right? With MotoGP, which we'll get into a little bit in a moment. That the Monaco Grand Prix saw a strategy change with a required 2-stop race. Still, it came down to the top 4 cars on lap 1 finishing in the same position. Lando Norris led Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, and Max Verstappen. Now Norris has a Monaco win on his resume, potentially silence some doubters after Piastri, has been pulling away with the championship lately. Jonathan, does this make the case that Norris is still ready to challenge Piastri as McLaren's top driver and that he's not becoming the number 2?
Absolutely. He had relatively slower start to the season, compared to like really coming out of the gate swinging last season. But yeah, I think he's absolutely ready. Piastri has kind of had his moment, really get the ball rolling, really prove his worth. Now I think, Lando, like getting such a big win like this, like we talked about with Palou, in Indy and on the ovals and everything, I think is just going to catapult himself into more momentum for the summer, and it's going to be fun. We haven't really seen like a teammate battle in F1 like this since the days of like Rosberg and Hamilton. So absolutely.
I'm actually going to go the other way. Oftentimes we come to Monaco and we just see a race that played out like it did on Sunday. More of a parade than anything else. To Formula One's credit, they did try to shake up the race through forcing 2 pit stops for each team, and for a while that seemed to really add some zest to the race, especially later on as Max Verstappen decided to extend his second pit stop out until the second to last lap. Obviously leading the race over Norris and allowing not only Charles Leclerc to pull up to Norris's rear bumper, but Oscar Piastri as well by the end of the race. I just think that it's really hard to glean much from this race in terms of like overall performance. It just feels like if you get the pole and make it through lap 1, you've pretty much got the race won as long as you have solid pit stops, and the Papaya pit crew is more than capable of delivering fast pit stops. So I do think that just by sheer virtue of Lando getting this win and getting those 25 points, that will propel him forward. But at the same time, I've just seen way too much out of Piastri that shows that he's handling this car itself a lot better than Lando is. Now, granted, we won't know what the ramifications of the flexi wing ban are going to bring that team come next month, but I just feel like right now Oscar Piastri should be the number 1 driver there, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they kept the door open and let them race, because I just think that they're far and away the 2 championship contenders. I think if you get Max Verstappen in traffic in that Red Bull can't pass anything. So yeah, I think that it would be great if this leads into a title fight, but if Verstappen gets too close, I think the obvious answer is to allow Norris to back out of the title fight and let Piastri have it at the moment, but that could change.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be fun to see both McLaren drivers battling for the championship later on in the season after Max Verstappen's had a good go of it lately, winning multiple F1 world championships. And also, also this is Monaco, so the start is everything. So usually, what the positions are, turn 1, lap 1, that's usually how it ends. So if Lando Norris had lost his race somehow, that would probably be the ultimate choke job. As Pato Ward was saying earlier, that and Marcus Ericsson ended up choking away that Indy 500. So it would have been miraculous if Lando Norris had choked away this race. So I think, given the fact that it's Monaco, that also helped him out as well. But that's certainly not going to discount the fact, that this is a crown jewel win for Lando, really good for his career. Maybe they'll give him momentum in a title fight, try to try to get a little bit closer to Piastri in terms of performance. And as I just mentioned, Monaco is F1's premier crown jewel event, and this is the last time it'll be a part of the Memorial Day weekend, where you have your breakfast in Monaco, lunch in Indy, and dinner in Charlotte. And for many, Monaco is a part of, this great day of racing. And there are no plans for this to occur again anytime soon for the foreseeable future, as I believe Monaco's moving to the first weekend of June moving forward, starting next year in 2026. Tanner, could this diminish the hype for the greatest day in motorsports with Monaco moving to June next year? I know I mentioned MotoGP and Silverstone today. MotoGP, is a really great championship that I respect and have learned to enjoy over the last few years, but it certainly doesn't, get the same feel, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, at least for me, MotoGP scratches the same itch as Formula One. But to kind of touch back on the question itself, I think if you're a traditionalist, this definitely puts a dent into how you feel about it. I wouldn't call myself that, but the racing product at Monaco in the past decade, probably longer, has just not really been up to snuff, has really not produced a great race. Oftentimes people refer to it as a parade. In fact, in our grid Slack channel, I called it the parade of opulence because of how much money it costs to put these cars on the racetrack. But yeah, it's kind of become a shell of itself. The fact that you just can't pass because the cars are so big and so wide, it's just unfortunate because, like Kobe said, this is supposed to be the crown jewel event for Formula One, and it's felt less and less like 24 karat gold like it's supposed to, and more like pyrite the past few years. So I'll be sad that we're losing a motorsport on the greatest day of racing, but at the same time, I'm not going to be sad that I'm going to get 2 more hours of sleep that I normally wouldn't get because Monaco is on, and simply because it's on. Not because the race is actually breaking out during it, but because it's just on. So at the end of the day, it's sad, but like, what are we really losing at the end of the day? It's just not a great race at this point.
If this were a 3-course meal, this would kind of be the soup or the salad. No one really talks about the soup or the salad after the whole dinner's done. It was just kind of a nice thing to say, hey, we're having something. Let's lead into this. We got the entree and dessert coming up afterward. It's something nice to wake up to, have, a cup of coffee too, and just kind of get the day started. It's too bad that it's moving away from the weekend, with the 600 and the 500, but man, the 500 and the 600 are still phenomenal races with so much prestige that I don't think it's going to diminish the hype at all. Everybody will get more sleep. It might be even more hype because people will be able to sleep in,
Yes, and it'll also be easier for all of us here at Grid Network, so we don't have to wait for the Monaco Grand Prix to end. We can just get into our pre-race show, even potentially go on the air earlier, maybe 10:30 a.m. Eastern time next year, if that we don't have to wait for Monaco for a certain race to end. So I think it'll be easier, and also I would be much happier to get a few more hours sleep in, because waking up early on Monaco has been a tradition for so long. And then for Monaco's to move back in June, I'll be honest with you guys, I don't usually like when Formula One goes to Europe, unless it seems like it's going to be a good race, or unless a track I really like. I'm not going to wake up and watch it live. I'm just going to watch the highlights or watch the race broadcast later while I'm waiting for an IndyCar or a NASCAR race to go on. And I'll tell you, next year, first weekend of June, if I'm still alive, I'm going to be asleep when Monaco's on, because the on-track product there, it just hasn't been there, and I don't think it's worth waking up for, just on a random weekend in June to try to watch that race. So Monaco next year will probably be on my list of race highlights to watch, so I can talk about it here on the air. And in regards to Formula One trying to spice up the show by requiring 2 stops instead of just a 1-stop race, basically the 2-stop race did absolutely nothing to help this on-track product. And I don't really know what they were hoping to accomplish with this, but it basically accomplished nothing, because it didn't really add much or make the on-track product more exciting. And and Max Verstappen, when he was asked about, the on-track product, he said the best he could come up with, maybe someone throw out a banana peel and the car start to slide, because there's really there's really nothing that that F1 can do in this situation. I believe we have a comment here in the chat from Denver saying the Monaco Grand Prix is dead. There is no way to save it. Lost its marquee appeal as one of the crown jewel races in the world. Well, I think when it comes to Monaco, I think a lot of people, like the people who enjoy it, is like for the pomp and circumstance, the history of Formula One, since it is, one of the iconic classic tracks of F1. But I think it's safe to say, that these F1 cars have outgrown Monaco. I mean, Monaco is not a bad track, because Formula E cars, they can overtake, and they put on a show here every year. And Formula E, probably puts on the best race at Monaco. And so it shows, you have smaller cars and, a good on-track product. You can put on a show here, but Formula One, cars just way too big and the streets are too narrow. So it's just really hard to do anything here in the streets of Monte Carlo. What do you guys think of what Denver said about Monaco being dead and there's no way F1 can save it, and that it's lost its appeal as one of the crown jewel races? Starting with you, Tanner, and then Jonathan.
I think it needs a considerable facelift of some kind in order to improve the racing. I don't know exactly what that is, considering we're talking about a street circuit. I've thought maybe if we take the chicanes out of the track, it might make it better, but it also increases the danger factor of the racetrack and how fast the cars are going. So that's a whole other can of worms that you'd have to consider. As I put in our chat here, to kind of go with Verstappen's comment, bring item boxes to Monaco next year. I mean, it can't make the race worse to see a couple fire flowers and red shells get thrown around. So, F1 kind of did the wrong collaboration with the wrong animated character in Mickey Mouse. They should have done something with Mario Kart, so that way we could have a actual exciting race at Monaco, seeing 24 racers in Mario Kart World take that on here in a few months. But to get back to the question, I think if we just keep doing the same thing at Monaco and expecting something different to happen, we're just not going to have anything different happen. So, I mean, obviously we hope, and we talked about it in our, lead up to this week, that maybe having a shorter wheelbase and just an overall less lengthy car might make the racing better, but I can't imagine 4 inches this way and 8 inches long ways is really going to go that far in making Monaco a great race.
Man, that's cold. Working with the wrong animator, Mickey Mouse instead of Wow. Whew. Man, colder than the water. Wow. But I think if they're going to make changes, they got to make changes that are going to improve the racing everywhere else. Something that can, a rising tide lifts all ships. Something like that, where you're not only going to make the racing better at Monaco, you're going to make the racing better at other tracks where it may be kind of lackluster. So, I don't think it's dead, but it's definitely in a lull. We saw this with the Coke 600 too, where I think 2021, where Larson was pulling out to a 10-second lead. It was bad. Yeah, we can say that now because we have great racing, but it was bad. And people on Twitter were saying, man, why do we run 600 miles? This should be 600 kilometers. Why do we do this? Why is it worth it? It's not dead. It just needs some changes, something to kind of refresh the racing.
Yeah, I don't want to take it to hospice care. It just needs some physical therapy.
Yeah, or occupational,
Or occupational.
Yeah, that's definitely the best way to put it. And Jordan Bianchi from The Athletic said that he believed Monaco needs a facelift like Atlanta had, something to try to spice up the action there. I don't really know what much they could do with the streets of Monaco to try to make it better. So I guess we'll continue to have this discussion year after year. We'll go to the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix. The racing will be just a procession. It'll be just as boring as it was this year. And then we'll be asking the same question 1 year from now on Grid Live Wrap Up on this Memorial Day Monday, saying like, what can we do to improve the racing at Monaco? So I think that this will be an endless discussion we'll have until we're no longer around. And with that said, just get into a quick MotoGP recap. An early British Grand Prix saw heartbreak for Fabio Quartararo, who looked to be on track to break a long winless streak for him in Yamaha, but a mechanical issue ruined his race. He was very emotional. Alex and Mark Marquez both crashed but recovered. after the red flag on lap 2. Pekka Bagnaia crashed out while Marc Marquez recovered for a third-place finish, and it was Marco Bezzecchi taking the win ahead of Johan Zarco, who brought Honda a second consecutive podium finish. And the next MotoGP race weekend is June 7th through 8th at Aragon. I believe that's in Spain. And with that said, Joe, let's talk about this week's grid ranking.
Yeah, the grid ranking, another week, a big week, of course, with Memorial Day weekend. And once again, no change up front. Alex Palou nearly has a 10-point lead over Elfyn Evans in the grid ranking. Sebastian Ogier is in third, but remember, he's not running full time, so he's anticipated to drop off of the grid ranking. So Kyle Larson in fourth, 13.32 points behind Palou. Palou, of course, is just dominating the IndyCar Series, which has 27 full-time teams, drivers. He essentially one race win that did not happen. He finished second place, so he is just on another level compared to Formula One. 3 different winners, no driver with 100% podium finish rate. You look at Oliver Rowland, who's in the top 5, first Formula E driver to be in the top 5 since Antonio Felix da Costa claimed the championship in Formula E. MotoGP, 5 different winners. Marc Marquez, the only rider with multiple wins. And Kyle Larson, still in the top 5 as well, too, but he only has a 69% top 10 finish rate, which is still very impressive. Supercar Series has 6 different winners in 12 races, so we're not seeing that kind of domination on the level like what Alex Palou is doing. Johnson, starting with you, how surprised are you to see Palou dominate a series which in the past has been known for being very close, very competitive, and we're almost seeing that in Formula E with Oliver Rowland, 4 wins, starting to pull away. Do you anticipate we'll see any other driver in Formula One, other series, start to dominate during the summer?
Well, like Tanner mentioned, with Piastri, if he, continues the way he's been going, I think he could be one driver who could continue domination. If Lando, maybe this isn't just a Monaco fluke, maybe he will rise up and challenge his teammate and become the number 1 driver and take him down. That would be very interesting to watch. I'm not surprised to see Palou doing what he's doing right now, just because he is phenomenal driver, has been phenomenal over the last few seasons, and it's kind of, this is his time. It's kind of like, I guess, Jimmy Johnson back in 2013, where he started the season off very strong, won the series' biggest race, and this is the time where he's really just taking his throne. So.
Yeah. If I had to look at a driver from another series, I have to agree. Probably be one of the McLaren drivers, Oscar Piastri or Orlando Norris. Guys, looking across the board in the grid ranking, it's extremely competitive across the board. I know it looked like for a while that Marc Marquez was going to dominate MotoGP. I know Kiska's picking Marc Marquez every race throughout the end of the season, Joe. I think you made a mistake with Marc Marquez. You probably should have Kiska picking Alex Palou every single race weekend. She probably would get more points from Palou than Marc Marquez at this point, because it seems like Marc is starting to really cool off. And in supercars, we used to see one driver completely dominate that championship, but it's been way more competitive than it has been in recent years with all these different winners we've seen. But Formula One right now, I think that, probably see Oscar Piastri or even, Lando Norris come on to dominate the series, because I don't really see it happening from anywhere else, throughout. But I think the one thing we can celebrate about the grid ranking, it's been outside of Alex Palou, it's been one of the most competitive grid rankings we've seen in the history of this system.
Yeah, for me, I don't think it's really a surprise that Palou has been doing what he's doing. This is really him just kind of sharpening his knives in a sense. I mean, I've talked about it at length on the show before, but Palou went through the entire 2023 IndyCar season and scored only 8th place and above finishes the entire year. So him continuing to push and continuing to mount this insane season is really just building off of what he's been building over the past few years. So I'm really not too surprised by his performance to this point. Now, I agree with my other 2 panelists here that Piastri is probably the one that we should look at as far as having a singularly dominant season going forward. Already has 4 wins through 8 races now, I believe. So a pretty solid start for him. But like I said earlier in a previous question, the Flexi Wing ban is coming up. So we'll have to see how McLaren reacts to that. As far as like other racing series are concerned, I definitely look at like someone like Brock Feeney, one of him or Will Brown kind of pulling away at some point, though it looked like Cam Waters might have a better campaign to start the season. And in NASCAR, it's really hard to say that someone's going to have like a dominant season in that because of the numerous factors that go against the idea of dominance in NASCAR at play. But you have to look at someone like Kyle Larson, someone like Christopher Bell. I know I mentioned coming into this season that Christopher Bell, came into this season off of a very hot 2024 where I felt like he left a lot of wins on the table, and especially in the summer months. And we're finally entering that stretch again where he is going to a lot of tracks where he had a very dominant car last year and has a whole year worth of experience to kind of build from. So he would be the guy I would look towards, especially considering his speed at practically any type of racetrack. Kyle Larson, as I mentioned, is, obviously tied with him in the league lead in wins. But there is a driver in NASCAR that hasn't won a race this season that's shown a lot of speed, and I predicted that he'd be part of a big 3 at some point this year. And with Bell and Larson, and that's Ryan Blaney. I've picked him a ton of times already this year and have gotten bit every single time. But I still have faith in that 12 Penske team that they're going to find the right combination and then start reeling off wins. They've got a really solid stretch for them coming up here with Nashville, where they've been strong, Pocono, where they've won twice, and on top of that, Michigan, where they won in 2021. So, and that's just in the next 4 races. Obviously, Mexico City is going to be a big question mark for everybody, but then you've also got Iowa later in the schedule as well. So, I don't think the domination out of all the racing series is completely out of the question, especially since we're only at the end of May. But it's definitely looking like Piastri and Palou pulling away out of anybody. But I wouldn't be surprised to see someone from NASCAR take the reins of the series and direct it going forward.
One name, William Byron, for sure.
He did put in the best performance I may have ever seen out of him in that loss last night. Very strong performance out of him, and wouldn't be surprised to see him rise to the challenge of this summer.
A lot of potential from Byron. MotoGP, I think if Marc Marquez makes less mistakes, he's going to be up there. And Palou he's just on another level. Matt White, I saw on the X platform, he said if he's not in your top 5 drivers right now in the world, Alex Palou, why not? He's on an incredible run. And of course, we still have over 100 races in the grid ranking. Taking a look at the grid ranking, Pecco Bagnaia dropped all the way down to 21st after his crash at the race for MotoGP in Silverstone. Marc Marquez back up in the top 10. Several changes throughout the grid ranking. Of course, we got more racing with Detroit and Nashville for the NASCAR Cup Series coming up and follow the grid ranking. And of course, Wednesday, Kobe will be on the air with Matt for the updated Grid Endurance Performance Index, a very busy race weekend for endurance racing. With that said, let's go ahead to our one shining moment.
Yeah, time for our Grid One shining moment on this extremely busy and exhausting racing weekend. I know I'm exhausted. I was awake for 21 straight hours working on content for the Grid Network website, and I've gotten less than 5 hours of sleep. So I'm ready for a rest before watching tonight's encore show and doing a little bit more work on the homepage. And let us know down in the chat below what's one of the things that stood out to you the most from this busy race weekend on Memorial Day. And, we had Monaco Grand Prix, the Indianapolis 500, the Coca-Cola 600, and the British Grand Prix for MotoGP. Pick from one of those races if you'd like. And starting with you, Jonathan, what's your one shining moment?
One shining moment is AJ Allmendinger in the Coca-Cola 600. He started 5th in the race. Here in the 4th most stage points, I'll read the names. William Byron, 30 points. Tyler Reddick, 24. Denny Hamlin 22, and AJ Allmendinger 16 stage points. He's right in the thick of the playoff hunt. He earned the third most points on the night overall. Great race, great run. Yeah.
To tag on to that, AJ Allmendinger also is apparently going to be with College Racing for another year, extending into 2026, as was reported this morning. But as for my shining moment, it's not going to go to a driver or a race team. It's going to go to a racetrack. It's going to go to Charlotte Motor Speedway. I just adored the race that we suffered through last night. We all probably woke up at 7:30, 8:30 in the morning to wake up for the Monaco GP and stay up through the whole day. And after almost 5 hours of racing action at Charlotte Motor Speedway, we ended up with Ross Chastain coming through with an impeccable, performance to score the win. But the track itself put on an incredible show that really can't be overstated. Multiple grooves, drivers just searching every inch of the racetrack to try to find speed in their cars. And, after the racing that we saw at Monaco and Indianapolis that really just didn't quite live up to the hype, it felt like the Coke 600 exceeded the hype that it had and put on the race of the year for NASCAR and maybe motor racing in general. So my hat's off to them. And one last thing that I forgot to mention regarding Ross Chastain's winning performance in our NASCAR segment. When we look back on his career in 15, 20 years, whatever it is, when he's inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame, I know that a lot will be made of the Hail Melon, his move riding around the wall at breakneck speeds at Martinsville to lock himself into the championship four. But I don't want his career to be remembered solely for him doing that. I hope that when we're writing the story of his career that we properly pay, respect to the performance he put on last night at one of the world's greatest ovals in Charlotte Motor Speedway, where I think we should have the Cup Series championship next season.
My grid one shiny moment is going to come from the Indianapolis 500. It's going to go from the driver that finished third place, David Malukas, Little Dave. We all know what happened to him last year. He was going to be with Arrow McLaren. Big opportunity going from Dale Coyne Racing to Arrow McLaren. Then that fateful mountain biking incident damaged his left hand. Slow recovery. He was on the sideline last year. He watched the Indianapolis 500 from the pagoda as a fan. McLaren dropped him. We all know where that went with McLaren with everything going on for Little Dave. As we all know, it was this race, the Indy 500, where Tom Bloomquist had a big issue, didn't complete the race. Shortly later, he was let go. Who got that second chance? Little Dave. David Malukas had some good runs last year. This year, we were talking about how he's been very quiet this year. Where is AJ Foyt racing from? Some of the great performances last year, especially the second half, to nothing this year. He came out swinging, qualifying, got into fast 12. Good, solid race. The strategy all worked out. Just one of those deals. Palou got around him. Ericsson had a better stop, got out ahead of him. Ericsson got a little loose on that last lap. I'm pretty convinced that I think that had the caution not come out, we might have had a drag race for second place. But Little Dave, third place in this big race. The emotions he was showing. Bum he didn't get the win, but very proud of the team. They did everything right, and he just felt really good. And considering where he was last year to now, that is why David Malukas, my shining moment.
Yeah, certainly been a great time to be David Malukas, as you mentioned, Joe, considering where he was last year. I say he wasn't just there as a fan of the Indy 500. David Malukas was there working for IndyCar as a content creator with his wrist, and cast, still trying to get through, that break in the surgery that followed. So David Malukas, he was, at one of the lowest points of his racing career, and now he's at the highest of highs. And as we talked about during our IndyCar section, maybe the rumors of him going to Team Penske replacing an agent Will Power will start to reignite itself, because as Malukas has struggled to start the season, those rumors had really calmed down quite a bit. Actually, I have two shining moments, one from NASCAR and one from IndyCar. And my NASCAR one, can we talk about that great run that SVG had last night in the Coke 600, NASCAR's longest race? I don't think enough people are giving Shane Van Gisbergen enough credit for what he was able to do last night. And I find it amazing, some of the toughest races, toughest tracks in NASCAR, especially on the ovals, it seemed like, I saw this last year in Xfinity Series. That's where he seemed to shine. I ended up getting I believe he got a top 20 finish at Darlington, which is one of NASCAR's hardest tracks. And then for him to finish inside the top 15 last night, NASCAR's longest race, we completed all 400 laps, 600 miles. It shows you how far he's come in his oval racing experience. And it was reported yesterday that Shane actually got to participate in a test session for Chevrolet last month at Charlotte Motor Speedway. So he was able to log a lot of laps. And it showed that once he was able to get more practice on the ovals, it showed because, as Eric Estep said it best last night on social media, SVG showed up to race last night. He was aero blocking. He was making moves on drivers. He was racing drivers that he has never raced against before on the ovals. And for him to come out there, especially how he started the season, usually starts off the races outside the top 30, struggling at the back of the field, going a lap down. I don't think he was even lapped once yesterday, and he had a good car underneath him, and he was just doing everything that he needed to do. And it shows, you give him a car, you give him some time, maybe he can become, I'm not going to say a front runner, a contender on the ovals, but maybe SVG can, at least become a driver who can get up there and compete, because he was truly getting after it last night. Made that incredible stretch on the front straightaway last night when he was battling Stenhouse for position. And hopefully for his sake, this will continue as on. I think we saw a glimpse of that last weekend at North Wilkesboro and All-Star Open when he got to lead and he was mixing it up with some of the other competitors. Maybe he just needed a handful of races for this to click. It's starting to seem like, that he's understanding the ovals a lot better. And as Trackhouse, continues to improve its Cup Series program, as we saw last night with Ross Chastain's victory, maybe we'll see Shane rise to the occasion as well, because it seemed like he's getting a little bit closer to his teammates in terms of performance. And a quick shining moment from the Indy 500. I know he lost the race, and Pato said he choked, but we got to give a call to Marcus Ericsson as well, because during his couple of years being an Andretti Global driver, it's been a really difficult step for him. It seemed like from the start that this was not a good marriage at all, that he just seemed out of place at Andretti compared to Colton Herta and Kyle Kirkwood. And for him to come out here, have a shot to win the Indy 500, had a great start, got all the way up in the top 5, used some strategy to pick up a few more positions, and to be able to be there at the end with a chance to win his second Indy 500, given how difficult it's been for him at Andretti. Think that's a really good run for him. I know he was disappointed, but I think at the end of the day, you have to be proud of the effort that he put in. And that's why Marcus Ericsson's my last shining moment. I believe we're out of time for today, Joe. I think you made it.
Yep, a little bit of a longer show, but we had a long race weekend, 4 great races, 3 great crown jewels. Really, Silverstone is a crown jewel itself as well, too. Anytime you're racing there from MotoGP, that's who was racing there. This upcoming weekend, we got Formula 1 in Barcelona, NASCAR in Nashville, Formula E, Shanghai doubleheader, and IndyCar Detroit. Alex Palou trying to go for another win in a row. World Endurance Champion, IMSA will be at Detroit as well. So the Grid Endurance Performance Index will be following IMSA. Busy weekend on Pick a Winner. Still pretty tight overall. And of course, we got more programs later today. Grid Encore will be on the air. Ben and Brandon will recap the busy race weekend at Charlotte, plus ARCA West at Colorado. Then Wednesday, Grid Tonight will be on the air. Kobe, Matt, Josh, Grid Endurance Performance Index for week number 9. And then later on the week, we'll be back on there to preview the NASCAR race weekend, IndyCar race weekend, and Formula 1. Subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our programs. And once again, encourage everyone to visit our website, gridnetworktv.com, and Grid Network TV across social media. And a big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin Shell, Mark, Ron, David, and Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network. For Jonathan, Tanner, and Kobe, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's show. We'll see you next time.